Finally tonight, Pope Francis meets with Israeli and Palestinian representatives at the Vatican in an effort to bring peace to the Middle East.
And people are fundamentally good. We are all fundamentally good. Yes, there are some rogues and sinners, but the heart itself is good.
Pope Francis met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the Vatican. The trip is part of Zelensky's tour through Europe to meet with world leaders. The two exchanged gifts during yesterday's meeting. The Pope gave Zelensky a bronze cast peace symbol of peace, and Zelensky presented a painting depicting the brutal Bucha war tragedy in Ukraine. The Pope has been a mediator in the Russia-Ukraine war. However, the Vatican has been criticized for not directly blaming Russia for the war.
Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert called the meeting, quote, important and emotional. He also said the Holy Father was presented with a peace proposal for Gaza.
President Joko Widodo echoed the vital need for interfaith talks given the growing number of conflicts and wars around the world.
Semangat perdamaian dan toleransi inilah yang ingin Indonesia bersama Vatikan sebarkan, apalagi di tengah dunia yang semakin bergejolak. Seperti yang kita ketahui bersama, konflik dan perang terjadi di berbagai belahan dunia, termasuk di Palestina, yang telah menelan lebih dari 40.000 korban jiwa. Indonesia mengapresiasi, sangat menghargai sikap Vatikan yang terus menyuarakan, menyerukan perdamaian di Palestina dan mendukung two-state solution.
While in Jakarta, the Pope is also set to visit the Istiqlal Mosque, which is seen as a national symbol for religious harmony. The mosque sits opposite a Catholic church, which is linked via a tunnel known as the Tunnel of Friendship.
Singapore has been hailed by Pope Francis as an example of how different ethnicities, cultures and religions can coexist in harmony. This especially in a time of conflicts raging around the world.
Pope Francis told an interfaith gathering in Singapore that the Christian faith was just one of many roads to God. He said through an interpreter, it doesn't matter if you're Sikh or Muslim or Hindu or Christian, it's all the same thing and it's all good.
Throughout his papacy, the leader of the Roman Catholic Church has stressed the importance of interfaith dialogue.
I encourage you to sow seeds of love, confidently tread the path of dialogue, continue to show your goodness and kindness, and be builders of unity and peace.
In order to be inclusive, the Pope told those assembled that no one should say their religion was more important or truer than anyone else's. Well, if you have to deny truth in order to be inclusive, then how valuable is that inclusion? If inclusion is based on a denial of the truth, then aren't you including people in a lie? And if inclusion is only made possible by inviting everyone to close their eyes to reality, then aren't you seeking to include everyone in a kind of insanity?
The Synod in Rome has completed its third week, which has focused on governance and delegation of authority in the church. Many Synod participants have stressed that while each particular church brings a uniqueness and richness to the universal church, unity is more crucial than ever.
I want to start with comments made by Cardinal Gerhard Müller this week. Now, he rejoined the Synod after missing the start of the event due to illness. He renewed his criticism of this gathering, saying it is not a synod of bishops due to the presence of lay voters. He also warned against the creation of what he calls a post-Catholic church. Quote, we cannot follow the example of the ancient Gnostics who wanted to transfer the church to a higher stage of its historical existence and disguise this betrayal with the beautiful label of a synodal church. Father, he also cautioned against the church becoming Christianity without dogma, sacraments, and apostolic magisterium.
What we're facing here is something unprecedented in the history of the church. We discussed this a year ago, Raymond, when we were talking about the changes in this composition of the synod. A synod of bishops is precisely that, of bishops. When you bring lay people, priests, deacons, women and men religious, all together, it ceases to be a synod. Now, the Pope has decided that this is what he wants. He wants this kind of meeting, but it is different than the Synod of Bishops as established at the Second Vatican, first of the Second Vatican Council, but then put into effect by Pope Paul VI. So Vatican II called for a meeting of bishops, and now we get a meeting of everybody. So that's wrong. This gives the false impression that lay people have an equal say in the governance of the church, and that theory's been going around a lot. In fact, Cardinal Muller is quite aware of this. People have this notion that if you're baptized, you get to be ruling in the church if you're picked for that. That's not how it works.
Earlier, Catholics and Muslims gathered near the Istiklal Mosque, where Pope Francis participated in an interfaith meeting. The mosque is the largest in Southeast Asia. It was designed by a Christian architect and stands just a few meters from the Church of Our Lady of the Assumption, a Catholic cathedral. The two buildings share an underpass called the Tunnel of Friendship. The Pope's visit is an opportunity for Indonesia to showcase its commitment to religious harmony.
One of the things that struck me about all of you here is your ability to engage in interreligious dialogue. And this is very important, because if we start to fight amongst ourselves and saying, my religion is more important than yours, my religion is true, yours is not, where will that lead us? Because every religion is a way to arrive at God. There's only one God, and each of us is a language, so to speak, in order to arrive at God.
Is the Pope Catholic? All of a sudden, that's not a rhetorical question. Some saw it as a wonderful admission that we're all right in our own way. Others saw it as a humble confession that none of us can claim to be right. But most, and I suspect the Pontiff himself, saw it as a way of being inclusive.
Questa immagine ci ricorda una cosa importante, che gli aspetti visibili della religione, i riti, le pratiche e così via, sono un patrimonio tradizionale che va tutelato e rispettato. Ma ciò che sta sotto, quello che scorre in modo sotterraneo, proprio come il tunnel dell'amicizia, potremmo dire la radice comune a tutte le sensibilità religiose, è una sola: la ricerca dell'incontro con il divino, la sete di infinito che l'Altissimo ha posto nel nostro cuore, la ricerca di una gioia più grande e di una vita più forte di ogni morte, che anima il viaggio della nostra vita e ci spinge a uscire.
Ah, yes, inclusiveness. It's become the number one priority in our culture.
Identity, belonging, representation, connection, inclusion.
Around inclusion.
The next chapter of inclusion.
Inclusion and equity.
All very good, but to be inclusive, you have to include people around something. Our culture, having given up on truth, is trying to include people around inclusion. And without shared values, thanks to decades of multiculturalism, we're trying to create social cohesion around a shared desire for social cohesion. It's a fool's errand because none of it makes sense.
The universality of the Catholic Church is well reflected in the International Synodal Assembly. In an exclusive interview with EWTN's Colin Flynn, Cardinal-elect Archbishop Tarcisius Isao Kikuchi of Tokyo explained that the very small Japanese church is also very international. While recognizing the importance of diversity, the Archbishop, whose motto is Unity in Diversity, expressed his desire to unite all national communities.
My policy actually is not to establish the separate community for different cultures and different languages, but I want to have the integrated community, which is very difficult. But then there are some priests and some people trying to engage other nationalities or other people to make a community together.
During one of the daily briefings, Australian theologian Father Ormond Rush focused on the importance of theology and tradition, stressing that living revelation is not just static truths, but a continuous dialogue between God and humanity. In his address, he explained that in the second session of the Synod, they are entering the process of the living tradition of the Church to actualize the message of the Gospel.
In other words, theology's role is to help the Church better achieve its primary mission of proclaiming and bringing about God's vision for our world. That vision, we believe, of course, is revealed in Jesus Christ in his whole ministry and death and resurrection and the sending of the Holy Spirit, the one who is to guide the Church into the future. And so this is what this Synod is doing. listening to that Holy Spirit.
The Western world is in crisis right now. Yes, inflation and housing and energy and security, the cost of living, all of those things are enormous challenges. But the greatest crisis we're facing is one of reality and of meaning.
Okay, final question. The Pope was asked about your candidacy and Kamala Harris, and he instructed Catholic voters to vote for the lesser of two evils. Who do you think he means and why?
Well, I think he wants them to vote for me, and I stand for really everything that you stand for and that the church stands for, and she doesn't. She's a very different kind of a person. She's a Marxist. Her father was a Marxist and still is a Marxist, and they are not big into religion, I will tell you, and I'm not just talking about the Catholic religion, I'm talking about any religion. The whole Democrat Party's gone really radical left, and I'm the opposite. I am totally in favor of religion, and I also like the Catholic Church a lot.
Hollywood celebrities no longer talk about truth except as it relates to themselves. The only truth they acknowledge is my truth, which may be the opposite of your truth. But if you and I are saying opposite things, how can they both be true? Politicians, taking their cues from culture as they have always done, have given up talking about truth and falsehoods. Instead, they speak of misinformation and disinformation, the ultimate in subjective terms, which they now seek to enshrine into law.
Combating seriously harmful mis and disinformation.
Misinformation and disinformation.
We've seen where misinformation takes hold, it can spread like wildfire.
So we increasingly have laws that are entirely subjective because, having done away with objective truth, well, subjectivity is all we have left.
Tentunya harapannya perdamaian dunia pasti ya. Dari perang tidak ada perang dunia ketiga, juga di Indonesia juga tidak ada namanya perang saudara, juga tidak ada debat yang mereka yang sangat benar-benar merugikan negara gitu. Jadi berharap supaya rakyat Indonesia bisa lebih mengerti kerukunan beragama antara Islam dan Katolik dan Hindu.
China and Russia and Iran and North Korea may well be threats, but the greatest existential threat facing the Western world is the abandonment of truth. When everything, even the laws of the land, are subjective, then the only way to determine what is right is through might. Having denied any reality beyond our own feelings, which, let's face it, aren't always reliable, there's no authority beyond ourselves to whom we can appeal. And so to ensure inclusion and social cohesion, the government benevolently steps in. State control tightens, and bureaucratic tribunals are given the power to rule on everything we say and even on what we think.
La moschea, come anche gli altri luoghi di culto, sono spazi di dialogo, spazi di rispetto reciproco, spazi di armonica convivenza tra le religioni e le diverse sensibilità spirituali. Questo è un grande dono che ogni giorno siete chiamato a coltivare, perché l'esperienza religiosa sia punto di riferimento di una società fraterna, pacifica e mai motivo di chiusura.
But how can men rediscover truth and reality when even the Pope seems to have given up on believing in God?
Speaking at the UN, the Pope then headed down to Ground Zero for an interfaith service. Now, the Holy Father admitted that he could feel the pain from the past. CBS 2's Alice Gaynor reports.
All was silent as Pope Francis paused for a moment of prayer at the self-reflecting pool where a tower once stood. He placed a white rose on the memorial's dark granite. Former Mayor Michael Bloomberg introduced the Pope to relatives who lost loved ones in the 9/11 attacks. Music played as the Pope entered the 9/11 Museum's Foundation Hall for the interfaith service. As he greeted the religious leaders, their backdrop was the surviving retaining wall from the World Trade Center. They were united in their message.
The courage of today's gathering distinguishes us from the opponents of religious freedom.
Let us honor those killed in this place by becoming, in the words of St. Francis, instruments of peace.
Then the Pope offered a prayer for 9/11 first responders and families.
Give them strength to continue their lives with courage and hope.
There were meditations on peace from the different faiths. A cantor sang a prayer in Hebrew in honor of the deceased. And a cardinal sang along. Then the Pope spoke to the crowd in his native Spanish.
You can feel the pain here.
At the end, he made a simple plea.
Peace in this wide world.
Before he left, the Pope looked at artifacts that survived the attacks, including a charred Bible.
Professing to be wise, we've become fools.
Sono lieto di intervenire all'apertura del vostro nuovo anno accademico 2024-25. La prolusione integrale vi verrà poi consegnata. Io mi pongo idealmente sulle orme di San Giovanni Paolo II, che visitò la Facoltà di Sicilia 21 novembre del 1982, in occasione della sua visita pastorale nel Belize e Palermo. La vostra facoltà, nata con una forte vocazione ecclesiologica, è chiamata da dentro la storia e in ascolto del fiuto della fede che il popolo di Dio possiede, a farsi protagonista per affrontare quelle sfide che il Mediterraneo pone alla teologia: dialogo ecumenico con l'Oriente, dialogo interreligioso con l'Islam e l'ebraismo, la difesa della dignità umana del Mare Nostrum, spesso reso monstrum dalle logiche di morte, la forza culturale e sociale della religiosità popolare, la pietà popolare, come ha detto San Paolo VI, la risorsa della letteratura per il riscatto della